Doreen from Happy So Lucky. Today I'm going to talk about paper piecing tool I like to use. To start off with, you need some scissors just for cutting fabric. Any kind of fabric scissors will do. Some people like to have small snips too for snipping your thread. And then for your rotary cutter, I use both of mine. Probably for paper piecing I use my 28mm the most, but this is also good for big fabric cuts, so it's good to have both, and of course spare blades with you in case you need them. Then for the technique that I use a glue stick. This is the Soline glue stick. It gives you a little bit of a finer line. I find it, they're quite expensive, and I also find it a little bit goopy, but I do sometimes like the finer line for tiny pieces, so I use that for small piecing sections. And then this is actually from a Japanese stationery store. I quite like the Japanese glues because I find them less goopy. I think they're made out of rice, but you could also use Yoo-hoo glue or any other glue stick. Next on my list of faves is the roller. Now Violet Craft has a product of these. There are some other craft stores that have them without a brand, but it's basically a small wooden roller that you use for rolling your seams. This just prevents you having to get up to the ironing board every single time you do a seam, and in paper piecing some of your seams are really small, so it's a bit of an exercise routine getting up and down. This just enables you to be more focused where you are, and these are awesome for flattening seams. A removable fabric marker is really handy, especially when you're fussy cutting. Washi tape is helpful for when you're putting your pieces together for fussy cutting as well, which I'll show you in my fussy cutting video. When it comes to thread, I like a nice fine thread. I find Orifol is a really good thread for paper piecing, but you can use any 50 weight cotton thread. Then when it comes to cutting the pieces, this is my probably all-time favorite paper piecing tool. It's called the Add a Quarter ruler, and if you're going to buy one, I would say to look out for the Add a Quarter Plus, which is the later version that they came out with. The original one that they had didn't have this skinny fold edge, so if you have a look close up, you can see over here there's a little 1/4 inch ridge, and on this side here there's a very fine folding edge. It comes in a 12 inch, 6 inch, and I think there's also an 18 inch available. And the Plus is the one with the skinny edge, and this is really helpful for getting your 1/4 inch seams accurate and folding over your paper, which you'll see in my technique video. The needles that I like to use are either a 70 or an 80, just a regular standard needle, universal or a jean needle, 70 or a number 80. If I'm doing fine small piecing, I'll use a 70 because you can get into the corners a little bit smaller with a small stitch size. The foot that I use on my machine is a regular piecing foot. If you have a transparent one like this one, it just makes it a little bit easier to see when you're backing into a corner or getting to a little narrow bit. And then of course the old steam ripper. This is a fabulous one from Amy Friend. She sells these, and they're quite beautiful. Her husband makes them, but we can't paper piece without a steam ripper. It's an essential tool. And then just regular rulers, a smaller size, either a 4x12 or a 4x14. This is a 12x6, and I also like to have just a smaller 1x12 inch handy. Of course your pattern, so you need to choose your pattern and print it out and have it ready. Remember, when you're printing your pattern, to always print it out at 100% size. Do not size to fit, otherwise it won't be the size that it's promised to be. And usually patterns have this little 1 inch marker on there so that you can tell if you've printed it out correctly. When it comes to the cutting board, I have a big one on my table because I have space to have a large one, but you don't usually need such a big one for paper piecing because usually it's smaller sections that you're piecing. So you could use one of these, which are quite handy if you have a small space or if you're traveling to a retreat. I love this guy because he's half a 12 inch, well it's actually 11 by 8, and on this side here you have a little ironing board, so if you have a mini iron or even a large iron you can use it on this ironing board. It's very mobile, and if you have a small table you could just pop it over there and it would be very handy to use. The last tool which I recommend is a light box. Now, this is not 100% essential, but if you're going to be fussy cutting, I would say it's an investment you'll be grateful for the rest of time. This particular brand is the Daylight brand, and you can actually get a clear cutting mat that comes on top of these as well, which is really handy. I don't have one, so I just make do without, but they really are an awesome tool for positioning your fabric or for fussy cutting, so highly recommended. When it comes to your machine, any sewing machine, you don't need a 1/4" foot, excepting for when you're joining your sections. And to put your machine on either a 1.5 or a 2 stitch length, so that you can get small stitches. That makes it easier for the fabric, the paper to tear, and it also lets you get into those little small corners. And the last thing coming to joining sections that I'd recommend are these clover clips. I love them. You can either use pins for this, but I find that the pins will buckle the pieces a little bit when you have 2 pieces of paper and 2 or 4 pieces of fabric when it's all together. And for that reason, for joining sections, I highly recommend the clover clips, and I'll show you how I use those in my video on that too.